Hi guys, welcome back to Scalemotor. Today we're carrying on with the CBR1000RR-R build. We're going to be focusing on the frame and the swing arm, and we're going to get the engine into the frame and get everything all built up. I'm going to start off with some primer. I'm using Ultimate White primer, and the reason I'm using white is because there's going to be a lot of metallics painted. Metallics do better with a nice glossy black undercoat. So I like to do the white primer just so I can see the black undercoat going on. Just going to start slowly building the layers up, nice and thin at first. The Ultimate primer goes on really well. A nice dusty coat first and then 2 more coats on top, and it always ends up lovely. Next up, we've got the LP1, which I'm going to use for my gloss black base coat for the metallic paints. I always do a little test of the flow. I mix it about 50-50, sometimes a bit more thinner than paint, just depending on how it looks in the paint cup. You want to get it to a nice smooth kind of milky consistency. And then again, slowly building up the layers. The Tamiya lacquer paint covers really well, so most of the time I'll end up with 3 layers max, and normally then I'll go in with the 3rd layer and make it a lot thicker, not too thick obviously because you don't want it to pool, but with the lacquer thinner with retarder it self-levels quite nicely anyway. By this point I had left the paint in the paint cup for a little while, because while the previous layers were drying I went off to make a nice cup of tea. So when I come back I give it a little stir and just check the flow again, just to make sure it's still coming out nice and consistently, because I'd lost the muscle memory from the previous layers. I'm just going in for the final coat now, just making sure it's nice and smooth and glossy. The lacquer paint dries really quick, so normally I leave about half an hour before applying the metallic paints over the top, which is what we'll be doing next. So here I'm just cutting some circles out of some masking tape using a cheap and cheerful Model Craft circle cutter that I got from Amazon, very cheap. The circles are going to be used to mask off various parts we're painting in this part of the build. The inside of the circles will be used to mask off the ABS sensor ring on the rear brake disc, and the outside of the cutout circles I'll be using to mask off the sprockets on the chain. Next up, we're going to be using the alcad chrome to paint the chrome parts. This paint looks absolutely amazing over a gloss black base when applied right. You want to apply it in thin layers at a low pressure. The airbrush I'm using is the Ultimate Apex from UMP Retail, and it has an adjustable trigger tension. It's easy to use. You just take the back off the airbrush and there's a cylindrical screw close to the body around the needle chuck. You just tighten that in for more tension, loosen it off for less tension. With the alcad chrome, I like to tighten it almost all the way in, so the trigger is very, very tight. So it's harder to pull back. That way it'll stop me pulling back too far and ending up with a big splodge of paint when I'm trying to do some nice thin layers. You just build the layers up slowly, and you'll see it getting shinier and shinier. Depending on the effect you're going for, I like to do 4 to 5 layers, but that may change depending on your desired effect. If you've never used it before, I suggest just getting some spoons, getting a nice gloss black base down, and just practicing. The more you use it, the more you'll get a feel for it. Next up, we're painting the rear caliper. I didn't show the paint up to the camera this time, but it is again alcad and it's polished brass. I know the calipers aren't going to be made of brass, but I just love the colour that this paint gives. It's the same process as the chrome, just build it up slowly, adjust the trigger tension if need be, and you just build it up until you get that desired effect. Next up, we're using metallic silver from Zero Paints. This comes as part of the RC213V colour set. With Zero Paints, you want to put the paint down very thin. The paint is very hot and it can cause issues if you go too thick. You can melt and craze the plastic, or it can dry and crack, meaning you have to strip the paint back and sometimes the primer and start all again. You can see in the video in the background that the paint is barely going down on the part, and you can barely see it. I ended up doing maybe 7 or 8 layers this thin just to get the colour I was after, and I was leaving 5 to 10 minutes between each layer. It can be quite hard when you're used to spraying the LPs or even the primers from UMP, which I've been using, because they dry so quick, and a quick follow-up layer or coat doesn't really have much of an issue. But with Zero Paints, you do need to watch out because it can sting you. This happened to me on a previous build of the RC213V, which is why I have this paint. The fluorescent orange from the set ended up destroying the wheels from the kit, so I had to buy a new kit. Not a problem, because now I have spares for this build. Next up, we're using X18 semi-gloss black. This is just to paint the front end of the frame. I masked it off using 1mm masking tape just to go around the very edge of the area I wanted to mask. Then I went up to 3mm, just getting the edge of the 1mm tape, and then I think that's 6mm attached to a piece of paper, then wrapped around the frame, just to cover the big area, so I didn't have to cover it all in masking tape. And as you can see, I didn't get any paint on the frame, just where I needed it to go. Now we're going to be using Tamiya LP2. This is just a glossy white paint, and I'm going to use it as a base coat for the wheels. The wheels will be going a fluorescent orange as per the MotoGP bike, and it's the same colour I used on the RC213V build, and it's the exact pot of paint which destroyed my last set of wheels, which is why this is going to be a scary one. So here it is, the Zero Paints Fluorescent Repsol Orange. This comes with the Repsol paint set. As I mentioned, this is the exact pot of paint which I was using when I destroyed my last set of wheels. So it was a bit of a scary moment putting this down. I started off spraying the outside of the wheel. It's going to be covered with the tyre just to get my flow rate right, just so I know exactly how much I'm putting down. And it is a very, very thin coat I'll be doing. I ended up doing about 7 coats with 5 to 10 minutes in between each, and I ran out of paint. I only had a tiny bit left from the RC213V build because the paint is very thin. It takes a lot to build up to get the colour you're after. It doesn't look too bad how I left it, however it's not exactly what I was looking for, so I'll more than likely end up taking this wheel off, ordering a new pot of paint, testing it out on some spoons first just to make sure, any inconsistencies across the pots, just so I can kind of be aware of those beforehand. And then I'll probably add 1 or 2 extra layers just to kind of get the colour I'm looking for. The paint from Zero Paints does dry quite matte, so it will need a gloss coat over the top. I haven't obviously gloss coated these wheels because I knew that I wasn't happy with them, and I'm probably going to be doing an extra layer or 2. Next up, we're using the Tamiya panel line accent colour in black. It's a very, very thin wash, which I use to go around all the recesses just to add a sense of depth. Here I'm just going over the chain just to get in between the outside links and around the rivets just to make them pop a little bit more. I use this on all the parts I've painted, apart from fairings and things, unless there is an actual panel line you can see along the fairing. It's great for mechanical areas and bits like the engine and this part, the caliper carrier, which we can see here, and even the caliper. There's quite a lot of contours and dips, and this really helps make them pop. It will go on quite dark, as you will see at the end of this little clip, but I've got that cotton bud there just to kind of wick up any of the excess, and when it dries it will be quite light compared to how it went down. And if there's still too much, you can just get a bit of lighter fluid or enamel thinner or mineral spirits on the end of a cotton bud, and wipe away any excess. I'm using the panel liner here just to go around the welds on the frame. I've done the same on the swing arm, but essentially all I'm doing is just letting it pool up next to the welds while it's still wet, getting the cotton bud and just wicking up any excess and wiping it off the kind of peaks and the high parts of the welds. I done it to all parts of the frame really, the same process, just kind of letting it pool on a bit and then wiping most of it off when it's wet, and then when it's dry just come back, just double check there's not too much, and then wipe away any excess using lighter fluid. Next up, we've got a bit of decaling. My process for decaling is super simple. I've just got my ramekin filled with warm water. I've got microset and microsol, which are the bottles you can see at the bottom of the screen there. The open one is the microset, and that's what I use first. So I'll cut the decal from the back, the decal sheet, sorry. Then I'll pop it in the water, wait for it a minute or so normally. Then I'll pick it out, pop it on the back of my hand, move the decal across, just so it's easier to get at with tweezers. Then I'll get a cotton bud, dip it in the microset, and I'll put this down where the decal needs to go. Then using my tweezers, I'll just pick the decal off the backing sheet, pop it onto the model, and then I'll use another cotton bud just to push out any moisture from underneath the decal. I don't need the microsol for this decal just because it's quite easy to put down. It's a nice flat area. There's no kind of corners or dips or any molded details it has to kind of conform to. So I just roll the cotton bud over just to push out any excess moisture. You leave that and it should be fine. For more difficult decals, you would use the microsol. With this, all you do is the same process with the microset, get the decal where it needs to go. Once it's where it needs to be, pop a layer of the microsol over the top, leave it for a couple of minutes, and when you come back, it should have kind of softened up and conformed more to the area. You might need to do this a few times, but with the Tamiya decals, they're normally pretty good for strength, so when you come back you can go over them with a cotton bud or even your fingers, as long as you've wetted your fingers, otherwise the decal will end up sticking to your fingers. Next up, we're using the silver Pilot pen just to highlight the rivets in the chain. This was very time consuming. And like I mentioned in the last video, I like to do it after the panel liner. You can see here, I don't even think it looks that great, but it does add a little bit of visual interest to the area. Next up, we're just going through the manual and cutting all the vinyl tubing we're going to need. Sometimes it can look a bit out of scale, the tubing that comes with the kit, but the newer kits like this CBR, I think it looks pretty good. The measurements in the manual are actually to scale, so as you can see here, I'm just lining the vinyl up against the black lines in the book, and then just cut in maybe a mil or two over just to make sure I've got enough, because you can always take more away. So next up, we're just putting all the parts which we previously painted together. First of all, I have a tyre here from the RC213V kit, just because it's a slick and it looks more like a race bike. So I'm just sanding now to get rid of the mould lines. This sanding stick I'm using again from UMP. I like to call the chainsaw. If I need to move a lot of plastic, then this is the one I use. But it also works great for getting rid of that mould line on the tyres. I'm not just removing the mould line, I will be going down the sides of the tyre as well, just to kind of make it look like it's been used. Next up, I'm just gluing in the coil packs, which were drilled previously in an effort to add more detail later on down the line. I haven't decided yet if I am going to add the spark plug wires and the wires for the ABS sensor on the rear, but I've still got plenty of time to decide, so we'll have a think about that. Watching back now, I have realised that I have put the coil packs in pointing the wrong way. So after this video now, I'm going to pick them off, twist them around just to make sure they are pointing the right way. I know they're not really going to be seen, but I'll know, and now YouTube knows. Now we're just going to be adding some of those vinyl tubes which we cut previously. This one I'm adding now is for the throttle, which will operate the butterfly valves and the throttle bodies. These vinyl tubes can be a bit of a nightmare to get on, especially on painted parts. If they don't go on straight away, then just get a craft knife or your scalpel or anything really, and just scrape a bit of the paint off, which is what I'm doing here. The best way to get them on, I found, is not to push down, because they will bend and move, and if you're pushing, you're going to miss and then scratch your paint and poke holes in your fingers. Your best bet is to just pop them on the end and give them a little bit of a wiggle. You don't always need glue. Sometimes you may if you've scraped away too much paint, but in that case, just a tiny dab of CA glue will help stick them on. The Tamiya extra thin and contact cement and things doesn't really help, because it's mainly for gluing styrene to styrene. This tube here is going to be for the clutch. This bike has a hydraulic clutch, so it's not a cable, it is in fact a tube. So you could, if you wanted, replace this with a braided line. I didn't have any to the correct scale spare, so I just stuck with the kit tubing. So now we wiggled the engine into the frame. It was a bit of a tight fit, again because of the paint, but just had to scrape away a little bit of the paint using my craft knife, and in it goes. The screws I've got in a little pot at the side there. The manual calls out for the screw sizes, and again, much like the tubes, these are to scale, so you may see me picking the screws up and holding them up to the manual. But there are various different sizes, so do check, because you don't want to put one that's too short in and end up later on when you're sticking the fairings on with a massive screw left, and you have to take everything off, take the screw out which you put in previously, and swap them round. That can be annoying. Now I'm just screwing in the suspension. This was a bit of a nightmare. No kits I've done previously have had these dog bones which kind of move. So I screwed them in first and then popped the rear shock through the hole in the swing arm, and then tried to screw that to the dog bones. Looking back with a bit of hindsight, I could see it would probably be a lot easier if I screwed the dog bones to the rear shock and then screwed the dog bones to the frame. Not too much of a problem. We did get there in the end, and I did cut out a little bit, maybe 5-10 minutes of me fiddling. By this point I'd realised that on the race bike The rear hugger is carbon fibre, so I decided to carbon fibre decal the rear hugger of this one. A super simple process. Just get a bit of masking tape, stick it on the back of your hand, detack it a bit so it doesn't start pulling paint up, and then cover the part you're going to be making a decal for with the masking tape. You can then either grab a pen and draw around the part through the masking tape, pull it off, cut it with a craft knife or a scalpel. Or what I like to do, which you will see coming up here, is whilst the masking tape is on, if it's a bigger part like this, it can be quite easy to just go around with very small scissors and just chop slightly over the edge. As you can see here, just leaving a bit to kind of wrap around the part to go on the inside. Once you've cut your mask, it's simple enough. You just peel it off the part, stick it to the carbon fibre decal sheet. The sheet I'm using here is from Tamiya. It's I'd say one of the best. It's one of the only carbon fibre decal sheets I've used, and I have never really had a problem. The pattern looks great, and it goes down really, really well. It is the Tamiya 12681 for those who want to take a look. Same process as with the other decals. Pop it in the warm water, put a bit of micro set down just so the area is nice and moist, and then just move the decal into the position it needs to go. Once it's there, get a cotton bud, pop a bit of micro sol on and rub it all over the carbon fibre decal. You can do it in more than one piece. You can patch it. You could do the sides and the middle as separate pieces if you so wish, and the Tamiya carbon fibre decal does actually patch quite well. Once it's on and where it needs to be, I like to wet my fingers and use my fingers to kind of push it down into the bigger recesses, the easier areas to get in. For the smaller areas, I like to use a cotton bud and I roll it. You can also use the pointed cotton buds. Again, they're from Tamiya, just to get into the smaller areas. But again, I've just added the microsol, and I'm just going to leave it sit for 5 minutes. Leave the microsol do its thing, soften the decal, then come back and see if we need any more or if it needs any more persuasion. We've come back after leaving the microsol on for a good 5 minutes, and you can see it has conformed really, really well. I'm just using pointy tweezers to pop the air bubbles, and then I'm going to use my thumb just to push the decal back down so hopefully it conforms, and then any moisture left will come out of that hole we've just made. In hindsight, I should probably done more than one piece because there are a few wrinkles, but that's not a problem. They should be hidden by other parts of the model. Now we're just on to the assembly of all the parts we've painted and decaled. I've sped this up quite a bit because I do like to dilly-dally and mess about, so we don't want to be here for ages, so I've sped it up and I'm just going to leave it play in the background now with a bit of music, and I'll be back at the end with a bit of a recap. So the last thing to do was just to plumb in the rear brake line. The bike does have ABS, so the little black under tray which we clipped on in the previous section has some vinyl tubing coming from that. So one of the pipes will come from the black under tray and it'll come down and it'll go to a little connector block where the rear foot pegs attach. From there, there's a little pipe that goes to a connector on the swing arm, and then one last pipe which goes from that connector onto the rear caliper. And there we have it. I'm super happy with how it's coming along so far. There's just a couple of little things which I need to change, like I need to add another layer or two of paint to that rear wheel, and I need to change the direction of the coil packs because I now notice they are the wrong way round. However, I think it's going really, really well, and if you guys are enjoying as much as I am, please just give us a comment, a like, and hopefully a subscribe, and stick around for the next video. In the meantime, I hope you have a great day and stay safe.